everybody, and welcome again to the Risk Matrix podcast and videocast powered by Veriforce with James Junkin.
Here I am, excited. Guess what, Dr. Martin?
Got what?
It's warming up. It's almost spring.
It's almost, the birds are singing where you are. They aren't here yet. It's 20 degrees, but I know it's coming. So it's with James Junkin and myself, Dr. Martin, today, and we've got a great kind of banter back and forth going. We thought we'd bring it on the air for you all about just culture, responsibility, accountability, and all that jazz. But first, I'd like to give James the floor and let him talk a little bit about an event that's coming up.
Look, I am super excited to announce that the Veriforce Select Client Series event is going to be held in New Orleans, Louisiana, May 15th and 16th at the historic Higgins Hotel, which is right across the street from the World War II Museum. A lot of fun things to do in New Orleans, but you know, most people think about Bourbon Street and the party in the French Quarter, and that's true. I used to live in the quarter, but if you come to the Veriforce Select Client Series event, I guarantee you're going to improve your career while at the same time having an opportunity to see one of this nation's gems, which is the World War II Museum. So all listeners are welcome to attend. The sessions are super exciting. Here's one. How about becoming an unstoppable leader and expanding your business horizons by starting the day with our keynote speaker, Aidan McCullen's powerful keynote, The Change Tsunami, Leadership and Positive Culture in a World of Change. So if you're interested in coming to the event, again, that's May 15th and May 16th. Check out the event page at veriforce.com/NOLA-client-series. Hope to see you there. We will be having a live Risk Matrix podcast on May 16th in the morning with myself, Dr. Martin, and Brett Kevekamp, who will be talking about navigating the legal aspects of information security. Ought to be a really good time. I look to see everyone there.
Cool. And I just want to say, James, that was a long string of how to get to the event series. I'm pretty sure, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you have trouble, go to the Veriforce page and dial up customer service or the client service, and they should be able to direct you to how to get involved in that event. And again, it's not just for current Veriforce clients. Anybody can come to that.
Anybody can come. We've got a lot of festivities, but you do need to pre-register for the event. Again, May 15th and 16th in New Orleans, Louisiana.
All right. Thanks,
where
James.
It's warm.
Where it's warm, not like up here in the Northeast. So today we got a live one for you. James and I are in a special mood, and he floated the idea. This is James's idea to float this just culture idea, and you know, a lot of people are talking about just culture and punishment and accountability and how they all kind of weave together because, you know, just culture came about, I think pretty much, and James, we were talking about this before we got on the show, from the healthcare industry, right? And some of the things that medical professionals, the mistakes that were being made, and that there started to become more of a focus on the mistakes and errors, right? And trying to uncover that as opposed to creating a culture of fear that somebody's going to get blamed, right? And I think that's pretty accurate. I can give you a just culture definition if you want for us to start.
Let's do it.
Okay, so just culture is the concept that promotes a process where mistakes or errors do not result in automatic punishment, but rather a process to uncover the source of the error. The three elements of a just culture. Ready? 3 elements of a just culture: building awareness, implementing policies that support just culture, and building just culture principles into the practices and processes of daily work. Okay, none of that, in my mind, says that there's not accountability. Okay, but I think in the safety profession, where are we going with just culture?
Listen. There is still a thing called malpractice in the medical community. And I think in our move away from blaming the employee for everything, we've moved to a point where we have no accountability for anything in the academic sense. In the medical community, it's great, and it'd be great in the larger safety community as a whole. Let's admit our mistakes. Let's talk about it. Let's say where the system set us up, where we could make human error, and human error is predictable in a lot of cases.
It's inevitable.
It's inevitable. There's a difference between omission and commission, but there also has to be accountability. See, what gets lost in this is we're so afraid to apply any discipline nowadays. Companies are setting themselves up for failure post-incident when it comes to exerting unpreventable employee misconduct. You cannot exert that defense if you do not have some type of disciplinary program. And when I say disciplinary program, many times people think we just go from everything is cool to termination, as if there's nothing else in between. There are no other options for us in an organization or in a safety management system to deal with incidents that happen. So, you know, I believe in that definition in theory, right? But in application, there also has to be accountability.
Right.
Accountability.
I just really think that in a lot of settings, in a lot of safety theories, you said the academic world, we've really started to focus on this, you know, don't blame the worker, don't blame the worker, don't blame the worker, don't blame the worker. Because if we don't, if we do that, then people will tell us stuff. They will admit their errors, right? They will admit that there was a mistake. They will admit things, because there won't be punishment, right? Punishment in the normal sense. But as we
Right.
all know, most of us, if not all of us, especially the ones that are in the subcontract qualification systems, they have a progressive disciplinary policy.
Right.
There has to be a culture, right? A culture in which we're not blaming, right? But we're still having accountability. Okay. And you had a good analogy for this, right? And I don't know if you want to go into your analogy of
I mean, there's forgiveness, right? It's what we're talking about. Understanding and forgiveness. I've always been fascinated by families who have been impacted by violent crime. Okay. And then the suspect becomes the defendant, becomes the convicted. And a lot of times this violent crime has led to either immense injury or fatalities. People have been murdered, right? And then you have families that come and say, I forgive you for what you've done. That's a just culture. That's a forgiving person, right? But that doesn't mean the person who committed the crime is let loose back on society. There is accountability for one's actions. And I think what's happened in safety is for the past 30 years, we blame the worker for everything, and maybe longer than that, maybe all the way back to Heinrich and all the early days in the industrial age, where workers were getting hurt. And if the stupid worker just followed the rules, then everything would be perfect. And we know that that's not reality, or we just run you off and get somebody else without ever considering, hey, this worker has no machine guarding, very little training. We've worked this worker 18 hours a day for the last 30 days in a row in a hot atmosphere. You know, all those are causal and contributing factors to accidents then and today as well. But there are certain situations where we have done everything we can do as a company. We have created policies. We've created training. We've created work instructions. We've had stand down. We've reminded people. We have site leadership out there coaching and making sure that we're following these procedures. We've got safety folks out there doing audits and assessments. And we still have people that we like to use this term, well, they made a mistake. Was it they made a mistake or they just didn't care? Those are two different things. I mistakenly forgot to put on my hard hat and safety glasses when I got out of the truck. I've done that. You've done that. Everybody's done that. That's a mistake. I'm just not going to do it is not a mistake. So we can still hold people accountable for violations and have a disciplinary program inside of a just culture, right? You have to have both. And if you don't have both, if you have a culture in which there is no accountability for anything, accountability is coming, brothers and sisters, and it's going to come in an envelope from OSHA that says notice, penalties, and citations. Okay. And that's where it leads to. And you can say, well, we did training, we did all these other things that's required. There was a rule, the employees knew of the rule. We took steps to discover violations, but we didn't do anything about it when we discovered them. And then you're going to be writing checks, right? So I believe in treating people fairly. I believe in acknowledging flaws within the system and not blaming people for failures of the system, but I also believe in having accountability where we can progress. We can have forgiveness. We can give people second chances. We can do those things while at the same time having a disciplinary program that meets the expectations of OSHA for enforcement of our rules. If we don't have that, what do we have?
Well, if you don't have enforcement of the rules, right, and you don't have accountability, right, and you're always saying, well, we really just want to get to the crux of the problem here so we can fix the problem. And if we blame the worker, then they're not going to tell us. So we're just not going to blame the worker, and there's not going to be accountability. There's not going to be discipline, right? But if you do that, right, you end up having retroactive animosity between other workers who are doing the right thing, consistency, that they do care, that they do actually improve, right? Or they get talking to and they move on and they do better, right? And so one of the suggestions to have just culture and accountability at the same time, right, is that there has to be accountability, one, for your own actions, right? And you're also accountable to the people around you, okay? Because there's the culture and then there's the organizational culture. And again, you know how I like to get into the organizational culture being the root of all things.
Just depends.
And it just depends. And there's not safety culture, there's just organizational culture. And that's part of the organizational culture and a just culture is that we're gonna foster a learning environment, but we're going to enforce a progressive discipline policy that is fair to everyone, right? So then my question to you, James, because I know you create policies and procedures, how do you make a progressive discipline policy that can be fairly applied in a just culture to the 15-year, 20-year, 30-year employee who should know better, who makes the same mistake as somebody who is new on the job or as a 5 or 10-year employee? How do you justify your progressive disciplinary policy?
Right. I'm gonna answer it this way. What you're wanting me to say is we treat everybody the same, and we don't. I don't.
Right.
And I'm not
wanting you to say that. I want you to say it just depends, but
all right, because it does just depend. It's situationally based. I don't treat everybody the same because everybody's not the same. Everybody's not the same.
Incidents aren't the same.
Incidents aren't the same.
Parameters aren't the same.
You have to consider when we're talking about discipline, what was their contribution to the incident? Was theirs, as Dr. Reason says, the final garnish to a lethal brew that had been long in the cooking? If
Or
that's
was
the
it a
case,
primary ingredient?
or was it the primary ingredient? Two different situations, right? Was the act so egregious that you can no longer be part of our company? Did you commit the proverbial act of a felony
Hmm.
in what you did, right? You went bonkers and slapped the superintendent. That's a terminating offense in my company. Okay.
Mhm.
You put your hands on someone else, you're gone. Period. I don't care how long you've been here. So when you're formulating your progressive disciplinary policy and you're applying discipline, it really comes back to you having to do a really good incident investigation to determine what the causal factors were and get beyond what brought us to this discussion to begin with. What people weren't doing good in incident investigations, they just took the easy way out, which is blame the worker for everything. Now
So
it's
I
the other
laid a
way
trap for
around
you,
where we
James.
just say the system's to blame for everything and the worker has no role.
I laid a trap for you, and I was hoping that you wouldn't say what you just said, but oh darn it, you got me. I was looking for the incident investigation to be wrapped in somehow, and also all of the factors that surround that incident, right? Not the weather. I mean, I guess weather could be one of those things, but we're talking about environmental factors. We're talking about preceding factors. We're talking about what was in the brew before the garnish was applied. We're talking about, is it one of many things?
I'll give you
Is
an
it
example, a real world example. And a lot of things have changed in BP's organizational culture, and they'll be the first ones to tell you that. But BP, Texas City, 2005, a control room worker overfilled the distillation tower with, uh, basically it's an additive for octane additive for gasoline, blew out the top, formed a vapor cloud. It blew up, injured 15, killed 15 workers and injured over 200 contractors that were out there. Now, in the subsequent depositions, one of the attorneys said, hey, man, this is real simple. Even a child knows when you turn the water on in the bathtub, you either have to turn the water off or pull the plug. And they're like, the operator was asleep at the wheel. Why didn't you notice all that? Well, the company fired those operators, that operator that was there that night in that control room, without ever taking into consideration, hey, this operator, due to restructurings, performing tasks, 3 different tasks for 3 different processes that used to be the roles of 2 other people plus him, right? The maintenance on the sight glass had been in the system for months and months and months, and they just kept clearing it out so you couldn't get a good visual. The pass down notes were incomplete and led them to believe, reach other conclusions than what the intention was. There were a lot of other variables to this incident than just simply saying it was the operator's fault. In that case, I believe the discipline was
inappropriate?
unjustified, in my opinion, right? In my opinion, based on my research of this incident, because we set that operator up for failure. The system failed the operator. But
So
go ahead.
I was just going to say, so in a just culture, right, we've got to do our due diligence in order to make sure that the accountability and the punishment or for the crime or the progressive discipline is fair, and just, right? That's the
And
whole,
documented.
and documented, right? I
I
wonder.
said this to you earlier, and I've actually listened to Conklin and Decker talk about something similar to this. And they were talking about forgiveness. Forgiveness. And believe it or not, there have been times in my career where I needed forgiveness. even back when I was in the Navy, right? I make mistakes. I didn't make mistakes often, but I made mistakes of judgment
Hmm.
because I was a young sailor. But no one flushed my career over it.
Right.
You know, there might have been discipline, but it wasn't termination. It wasn't, I didn't get executed because of mistakes I made as a young sailor. But
Right.
as you get older and become an older sailor and you become more experienced and you get rank and you move up the chain of command, the higher up you go, more accountability is demanded of you and less forgiveness is warranted.
Right.
So a lot of times we talk about these things and accountability at the worker level. There needs to be a lot of accountability at the top. At the top. Hey,
Hmm.
number one, did I hire the right person? Maybe I've got a good person and I got them in the wrong job. Number two, did I support this person and give them all the tools necessary to do their job? Were my instructions clear? Was our training good? Did my hazard identification process, you know, make sure that we had good barriers and good defenses in place and capacity for the system to respond to these type of instances? So while I was listening to Decker and Conklin kind of talk about this, one thing that really came to mind was this idea of a just culture with the capacity to forgive, at the same time the capacity to have discipline, is really suited in a lot of the world's major religions. The idea of confession, right? I'm going to confess my sins, and then there's forgiveness. But that doesn't mean that there's not also accountability. I can be real sorry that I robbed the liquor store,
Right.
and the liquor store owner can forgive me for it. But I can also go to jail,
Right.
right?
And do
So
some time.
I'm just imploring safety professionals because look, down here where the boots still get muddy and the metal meets the meat, the theory has to work within the culture of the organization, right? We have to be able to take and apply these things. And sometimes I think we get caught up in the theory of it, in the way we would like things to be, you know, where people like in the medical community make mistakes, we confess it, we talk about it, we try to drive out human error and all that. But we all forget there's a thing called medical malpractice, and they will
Right.
take your license, right?
So let me ask you, let me ask you this question. So, um, in a just culture, as you've described it, or if we've been talking about it, do you discipline, does the progressive disciplinary policy look at mostly the behaviors that caused the incident or the severity of the outcome? Or both?
It's both. And our policies tend to focus toward the people at the tip of the spear. So systems, all systems, it's ultimately behavior.
Yep.
But the behavior of who? The behavior of the worker or the behavior of the management team?
All of the
Okay,
above.
exactly.
All of the above, right? And so when you're doing your progressive discipline area policy, if it's me, it's the behaviors of the collective, right? It's everybody in that situation. Now, if the behavior of the one is runs afoul of everything else that in the investigation shows that that is the one behavior that was incorrect, then I would think that your progressive disciplinary policy should address that, right? But if that one behavior is a compounded behavioral fall apart of the system, then I guess where do you land on using that progressive
Well,
disciplinary
I
policy? I
think
think
when we
it can be
talk about
flexible.
progressive discipline, we like to think of it like this, like you see in typical HR calls: verbal warning, written warning, uh, suspension with pay, suspension without pay, termination. Look, in safety, discipline can be, we're going to bring you back to retraining because something didn't take. Discipline can be, okay, we want to adjust culture. We're not going to send you to the house, but I want you to get up and talk about your experience. What led you to make this decision out there? Because others may be doing the same thing. That's part of progressive discipline, right? We're holding people accountable. We're sharing what those experiences are. We're documenting that in case we end up in something with OSHA. I have to detail that we take steps to discover violations. And then when we discover them, there's some type of discipline. But everything doesn't have to be this roadmap of verbal warning, written warning, 3 days off with pay, 3 days off, no pay, and then you're going to the house, right? It doesn't have to be that way. It can be one where we counsel people. Sometimes people have a bad day. And I'm going to tell you, I struggle with this. People that have been with me a long time, that have years of service with me, are there unpardonable sins, so to speak? Absolutely.
Right.
But in most cases, if they've been with me that long, I know their character, I know what their work ethic is, and most times they made a mistake.
Right.
And we can counsel on that mistake. And I like to say I'm as forgiving of everything. But look, man, when you develop relationships with people over a long period of time, you've got a body of work to examine. Whereas new workers, you may not have as much body of work to examine. You don't have that relationship with them. So you have to have a balancing act with treating everybody fair. But you don't necessarily have to treat everybody the same. And what I mean by that is what motivates people is not the same for everyone. There are some people, even with my own team, I got to be super direct with because they can take that. They want that discipline. They want me to tell them when they're messing up, right? And then there's some, if I'm that direct to them, they go into a mental breakdown, and we may have to check them in the hospital to get some therapeutic help. They can't take that type of coaching. It's the same thing in athletics. Sometimes you got to fire people up. Sometimes you got to calm people down. Emotional people make bad decisions.
And you got to know which one it is applicable to what person, right? That's
So
about
what's the
getting to
key?
know your
You
team.
got to know your team. So you really can't have a one size fits all. You can have some red lines. Like I have a red line. I don't care if you've been with me since we formed this company. If you put your hands on another person, you're gone.
Yeah.
Okay. You're gone.
But you don't have that for everything. Okay.
But I don't have that for everything.
And let me tell you about a client recently that I just revamped their entire safety program manual. They had, for every line item that they could think of a behavioral action or an action or infraction, right? They had a dollar amount. Okay.
So you get skinned.
You get $5 for this, $10 for that. You get fined, and it gets deducted from your paycheck. And I mean that's convenient, right? That's
Don't know if that's
punitive.
legal, but
I don't know, but it's gone. But here's what it does. That type of punitive discipline, right, removes the opportunity for somebody to reflect on their behavior, right? If we're not coaching, if we're not discussing, if we're not explaining, right, there's no connection to that guy just took $5 out of my paycheck or $15 out of my paycheck and this, right? All it just says is don't get caught, right? Because it ends up in them. So, I mean, what you're talking about is not a punitive discipline. It is a progressive discipline with variation for the type of people that you have on your teams.
Yeah. Now, let me give you an example. I come out and I see you working and you're not tied off and you're working at height. You could die. All right. I'm going to stop the job. I'm going to find the supervisor. I'm going to discipline the supervisor and this employee because this mistake could lead to the ultimate mistake consequence, which is they don't get to come home. And that's what I care about.
Right.
Let's get home. Right. Then I want to try to understand why did we not stop the job? That's why I think the psychological safety assessment and organizational culture assessment that you and I developed that we've used for its response to incidences for several companies really digs down into that. It's real simple. Just say you should have been tied off. Okay.
Why didn't you?
Why didn't you? Once we determined that there were no other causal factors other than Jimmy didn't want to do it, we're going to discipline Jimmy. Okay, we might not send him to the house, but we're going to discipline that. And then maybe it's retraining, maybe it's, getting up and trying to explain, whatever works in your organization, it just depends. But if I come back out there next week, okay, and the next week, then maybe we like you, Jimmy. We don't wish you well, but maybe you just don't fit in our organizational culture.
Right. Because we want to learn.
To make a change.
Yeah, we want to learn and we want to grow and we want to make a change in how we operate once it's called out to us.
One of the things that's the disconnect between just culture and the real world is there are no bad apples. Yes, there are.
Yes, there are.
There is not a person who's ever put on a pair of steel-toed boots and a FR shirt and a hard hat and safety glass and walk out there in the oil field that hasn't run across people that don't care. They don't care. They want you. They want to be the center of attention, and they want to say that they're not doing any of this.
Yeah.
And what's amazing is a lot of those people aren't the people that get hurt. It's the people they influence that gets hurt. Right?
There's the mutual accountability, right?
So high achievers, Coach Saban said it best. High achievers hate mediocre people. Mediocre people hate high achievers. You cannot have a cohesive, just culture if you allow bad apples to stay within your organization with no accountability. Okay? Sometimes we can't hug it out. There's too much at stake. We're going to let this guy go because he doesn't want to tie off. He doesn't want to tie off. And we're going to try to not blame him or hold him accountable. And he influences another worker that next week falls 65 feet to their death. I got to live with that.
Right.
Okay. So we have to have accountability. These rules are set up. Now, you and I, for their protection, you and I talk about this. There's prevention rules, there's compliance rules, and there's the idea to set guardrails that provide where work should be performed. The risk, okay? Outside of those guardrails become greater levels of risk. Work is not done always as planned. Things happen. And
work is not always done at the level of the guardrail either, right? So I've had people say to me, "Why do you set the guardrails here?" Well, I want to have a fudge factor. That's just me, right? And I want to be able to be reasonable when we have to set the guardrails a little farther out, right? Because of our risk tolerance or because of the type of job we're doing or whatnot. And I mean, I hate to say this, but this goes back to parenting, right? Kids with no boundaries, they spend their life seeking boundaries. Workers with no boundaries or no guardrails, right? They are constantly at risk because they're seeking the boundary. They don't have a good idea of this and no farther.
There's some rules and guardrails we can be in, and there's some we can't. Okay? So we need to be able to understand that work doesn't always go as planned. Having narrow guardrails to allow for real capacity outside the guardrail, we got to get outside the guardrail. But if we're constantly having to get outside the guardrail, I think we need to start thinking about normalization of deviance in our process.
Right.
You know, what's the risk for us to get outside the guardrail? And I like what you said, we're going to set this narrow. So if you step outside, I know from a system standpoint, I've got barriers and fences in place that are still going to protect you. We make
And sometimes I'm going to let you step outside the guardrail. I really am. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's where innovation comes from, right? But being able to apply that takes a really mature safety management system. That I'm going to frankly tell you, I don't see in most companies.
Well, we're going to get there someday, James. You and I might not be around by then, but we're going to get there. If we stop that pet peeve incoming, pet peeve, if we stop talking theory and we start implementing actual safety practice in the field, stopping this crap where we go and talk about, you know, theory X versus theory Y and theory Z versus theory G. Let's get our boots on, let's go out there and let's make things work, right? Let's really get back to our roots where we're actually implementing our safety management system principles in the field.
So I would say this to sum this episode up, because we've been going a little long, is this. I believe in a just culture. I believe in forgiveness. I believe in setting guardrails. I also believe in discipline. And I believe in accountability. And these are not mutually exclusive from each other. Just culture doesn't mean there's no accountability and there's no discipline. Just culture means we're fair in our application of this discipline. Right? We're fair.
And we're thorough in our investigation.
We dig deep in our investigations to see, were you the final garnish to a leaf of brew that's been long in the cooking, or were you the main ingredient?
Well said. Well said. That's a great place to stop.
So thank you everyone who watches our video cast, our podcast there over on YouTube at the Veriforce channel. Go down there, hit that like button, smash that subscribe button. If you ain't smashing the subscribe button, you're not doing what your mama wants you to do. Your mama wants to listen to the risk make, right? So check us out over there on YouTube and also on Spotify. You can subscribe on Spotify. Get these notifications when the next episode drops. Episodes always drop on Tuesday, sometime around noon, Central Standard Time. So we like our followers. We appreciate all of you. Like, share on LinkedIn. Get the word out there. And most of all, y'all keep bringing these workers home safe and high.